Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to SIVA Swine webinar, SIVA See the Future Together series. Today is our first episode, the Maximize Your Farm Security. Before we start, I have some announcement. For the handout, we have translated for 6 languages, which is English, Chinese, Japanese, Korea, Thai, and Vietnam. You can download from the announcement. You can click the announcement button and you follow up the link, and then you will see. You can select which handout which language do you want. During we have a seminar. If you have any question, you can click the Q&A button, which is on your right, and you can type, and then we will answer you in the end. Today we have three speakers: Ruth Art, John Carr, and Ivory. Our agenda for today: first will be introduction from Ruth Art, and then Raise the Wall Around Your Farm by John Carr, and then The Light at the End of Tunnel by Ivory. For now, I would like our Asian Zone Director, Ruth Art, to give us an opening and also give some introduction about the swine industry. Please welcome Ruth Art, and Ruth, you have control.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ruth Art. I'm the SIVA Asia Zone Director for SIVA Animal Health. I'm very pleased and honored also to welcome you to this first of its kind SIVA Asia Swine webinar. So the webinar is another means of communication that we are reverting to. Of course, like you, also us, we are in a kind of lockdown situation. So that means we need to revert to other means of communication. Still a bit unfamiliar, I have to admit, but I'm sure we are going to get better in it in the episodes to come. So we are in a very challenging situation today, as I don't need to tell you that. Beside the human drama that we are seeing right now due to COVID-19, more than 3 million people have been affected by the disease by now, and more than 200,000 people to date have passed away due to coronavirus infections. And it's a pandemic that is really happening on a global scale. So more than 210 countries have been affected so far. But beside that, it's also quite a big economic impact as well. So Rabobank, the Dutch agricultural bank, according to their latest forecast, they predict that the global economy might contract by 2.6% in 2020. Which means that this economic impact is even higher than the financial crisis of 2009 that most of us still are able to vividly remember. So it's a truly crisis of a human and economic nature. The Asian swine industry, of course, has already been in a quite a challenging situation, let's face it, due to African swine fever. That has been affecting most Asian swine industries across the region. Now, of course, countries like China and Vietnam are starting to come out of this crisis, but now the things are made more difficult due to the COVID-19 situation. COVID-19, of course, has a direct impact on consumption. The economic situation for many people is down. Furthermore, of course, restaurants are closed, tourism is down, trade is very much affected, and on top of it, you have a lot of operational issues as well due to transportation restrictions, for example, or also worker availability in the plants and on the farm as well. So it's a very difficult times, but I think the Asian swine sector is showing their resilience, being able, of course, also to draw lessons from African swine fever and apply those in the COVID-19 situation that we are in today. We have two speakers today with us, Dr. John Carr, who is going to talk about biosecurity measures that producers can take, of course, drawing lessons again from African swine fever and also applying these to the COVID-19 situation as well. And also we have with us one of our colleagues, Dr. Avery Zheng, who will be able to share with us their experiences in China coming out of the African swine fever challenge. And of course, at the same time, also coming out of a COVID-19 situation as well, still very early days. But we look forward to drawing lessons from the Chinese experience. So I wish you a very interesting afternoon with us. I hope you will enjoy the webinar. I can say that also from SIVA point of view, of course, also SIVA is somehow affected by this crisis, but I can tell you, I'm very happy to report to you that our plants, our factories, our labs around the world continue to operate almost as usual. And we are still able to produce our products and to distribute our products around the world. And also our research departments are able to continue to work on innovations for the future. So with that, I would like to again welcome you today, and I wish you a very interesting afternoon with us. And I look forward also to see you at the upcoming webinars that we're going to hold in the weeks and months to come. And even more importantly, I look forward to meeting you face to face again once all of us are going to be able to come out of this current crisis. Thank you very much and have a very interesting afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ruth, for the nice introduction and update the situation of the swine industry. For the one who just attend, we will have the translated proceeding or handout. You can download it from the announcement link, and then you can select the language that you prefer. For the Q&A session, you can click Q&A button, and then you can type your question, and then we will answer during the Q&A. Okay, for our next speaker, John Carr. I think most of you might know him already, but I will introduce him a little bit. John Carr, he's got his PhD from Liverpool and also worked as a professor for many countries. And now he's worked as a senior lecturer in James Cook University. Today, he's going to give us the topic of raise the wall around your farm. Please welcome John Carr to the stage, and John Carr, you have control.
Well, it's a great honor for me to be here today to talk about biosecurity, and the title of the talk is to raise the wall around your farm. We must put more bricks in the wall. We must control African swine fever. African swine fever is a terrible disease. It is raging rampant across Asia and is taking increasingly numbers of countries out, and it is devastating those countries' pig productions. Obviously the big pig production that we're concerned about is China, but we have major industries in Vietnam and the Philippines in particular that are now affected with African swine fever. And all of these areas need to be protected against classical African swine fever. So what we have, we've had many talks about different aspects of African swine fever, but what we have is a pig with a very high temperature, which is very red, and from a veterinarian's point of view, one of the things that I find very characteristic is a very enlarged spleen, and also this very large and hemorrhagic edematous gallbladder on the liver. And certainly there's very few other diseases that have such a hemorrhagic gallbladder. We do have a problem in Asia because we have classical swine fever, pestivirus, which is different from African swine fever, but clinically it can be extremely the same. So at this point we must make sure that we keep our classical swine fever vaccination up to date so that we don't create a clinical sign that looks like African swine fever. Currently we have our coronavirus COVID-19 major problem going on the planet, which is causing serious disruptions to our societies. Both African swine fever and COVID-19 are pandemics. They are around the world. They're on more than 2 continents. Interestingly, from a biosecurity point of view, the control of both is actually very similar. Both viruses have an envelope, a little fatty envelope, that it acquires as the virus leaves the cell, and this envelope can be destroyed by simply washing your hands. And if you wash your hands well, 20 seconds, paying particular attention to the thumbs, the fingernails and your knuckles, then you will reduce the risk of both COVID-19 to yourself and your families, and also African swine fever to your pigs. So what is the current situation with African swine fever? In some respects it's gone very quiet with COVID-19. But COVID-19 can be an opportunity for the pig industry to try and stop African swine fever, because movement of people, movement of animals is much less now while we're fighting this COVID-19 pandemic. So you see on the slide here, we have African swine fever present in Africa. The first slide is over the last 10 years. This next slide is actually over the last 20 years, and the pathogen has gone from Georgia west into Europe and now east over to Asia. And if we look at this next slide, this is the situation as it is in the world at the moment. The blue and the green indicate where things have resolved. Now, it does not mean that the area is free of African swine fever. It's just that there are no government reports coming out of these areas. The big outbreaks at the moment are in the Philippines, but we have new outbreaks in Papua New Guinea. East Timor is still ongoing, and we have the outbreak in Indonesia. These are the southern borders to the outbreak. So if we look at Asia in particular, then here we see the map of Asia, where we have our southern border of African swine fever is defined by the new outbreak in Papua New Guinea, East Timor and Indonesia. And living in Australia, obviously I'm very nervous about the Australian industry with these neighbours having a problem. The big current outbreak is in the Philippines, where the disease is still spreading almost out of control. We have old and infections which are now recorded in blue throughout Mongolia and China, but in all countries we still have active infections as well. We have an ongoing problem with the border between China and Russia. And the big issue with African swine fever is that in this area of Asia we have over 2 billion people, and about 0.7 to 1 billion pigs. And pigs represent 80% of meat protein eaten throughout Asia. And if we have lost half of our pigs in these major powerhouses of the pig industry, this is going to represent a loss of 10% of the human food protein availability on this planet. This is a planetary problem. This is not a problem just of Asia. And in order to replace that meat protein that we've lost, we're going to have to increase our chickens by 25% or our cattle by 40%. But neither of those two are real options. The option is we've got to get the pig industry back on its feet as soon as possible. Korea is a very interesting place, both personally and also in the African swine fever outbreak. The Koreans have been very vigilant and very open about their African swine fever outbreak. They have isolated the problem largely into the wild boar population, and have been very successful at controlling their commercial industry. This is going through the winter time when the pigs are fairly isolated up in the northern parts of South Korea. On the PowerPoint you can see the orange triangles are continuing infection of of wild pigs. The problem with the wild pig is that there's a lot of them. As you can see in this insert map, what we have to do is we have to protect the eastern seaboard of Korea. Can't allow the infection to drift down the eastern seaboard where there's high mountains and a lot of wild pigs. The little dots represent high densities of wild pigs, and you can see on the insert map how the eastern seaboard has a lot of wild pigs. The little drawing is actually with a line is actually the movements of a pig in Manitoba, and this was over a 2-month period, and you can see how the pig wandered around really over 50 kilometers. It wandered around the area. So these animals are they do tend to stay at home, but my worry in spring as it warms up is that the male wild boar particularly will go hunting for females, and they can cover quite a lot of distance, 30 kilometers in an evening. So the purpose of the presentation is to discuss biosecurity, and my plea to the veterinarians in the audience is we really must become much better at auditing our farms, and not so much being more honest, but be willing to say to our clients that it's not good enough. I mean, this brush is just not good enough. I mean, how am I supposed to brush my boots if this is what I'm being provided? And this is actually in England, but it doesn't really matter. You get the same brush everywhere in the world, unless you put your foot down and say it is not good enough. We've got to stop this. So we have the European risk factors in this next slide, and we need something similar for Asia, and maybe for each country, because each country could well be different. But you can see that the two big ones which are also present in Asia is illegal or unrecorded or recorded even pig movement, where we're moving infected animals from farm to farm. That could be through dead animals or through live animals. Unfortunately, even in Europe, we have feeding of pork waste, which is trying to be outlawed, but it is still accounted for over 30% of the outbreaks. The thing that's important to remember on this chart is that direct contact by people is actually relatively low risk. It only accounted for 0.5% of the cases in Europe. And even the wild boar in this study was only accounted for 1%. Most of the cases around of African swine fever spread was because of people allowing pig movement, or people allowing of people feeding pig products. So when we talk about the risk factors of Asia, we've got to control swill feeding. The problem that we've got is that particularly with a lot of native pigs and people living in villages, this is very difficult because they are used to feeding their own pigs swill products. The African swine fever problem in Asia is going to be a decades problem. It's going to take decades to resolve this problem. At the moment, we still don't have a vaccine. There's no vaccine on the horizon. There are plenty of trials, but really my hope at the moment is to find a vaccine. But I got to figure out other methods at the moment. If you have a problem on the farm or problem in an area, this graph, this illustration is what the Czech Republic has been trying to do in order to try and stop their problem. But this is very difficult in Asia. So what are the problems that we have within our biosecurity? Location is clearly one of the problems. If your neighbors are having a problem, then it is very likely that you will have a problem. Certainly from a Polish point of view, what we have found is that commercial farms will stay free from local small backyard farms, and they can stay free over if that backyard farm is within 200 meters. Commercial farms from each other will stay free if they're more than 1 kilometer. But 1 kilometer is still a long way for most commercial farms. The problems we have in the Philippines is that a lot of commercial farms are very close together. The next problem with the commercial farms is that if one commercial farm after another starts to go African swine fever positive, it then goes into a depopulation program. Then what happens is that all the rats and the mice on the infected farms are running out of food. So they will move to other farms where there is still food and pigs. And unfortunately what we've found in the Philippines is that farms that are African swine fever negative in an area with an active African swine fever program will go positive, and we believe because of rats and mice will carry the virus on their feet into the uninfected farm. Transport is a major problem. As you can see in the picture on the upper left, here we have pigs being transported. We have urine and fecal runoff off this truck. This hits the road, and the African swine fever is able to survive 11 days on the road, unlike coronavirus, which survives 3 days. 3 days is still significant when it's ourselves, but African swine fever is slightly more robust. It generally takes me less than a minute to find feces on a truck, even when it's been thoroughly cleaned. And the area that's often missed is actually the cab. It is amazing how often the cab is pretty disgusting, to be honest. We've really got to consider this transshipping zone. And the problem with transshipping is that it's a nice idea, but we obviously need to be quite a large farm to be able to afford to have our own internal trucks and external trucks. So the idea is that you have trucking that's designed to stay on the farm. This negates the need for a truck wash, because this truck doesn't need to be washed, it never leaves the farm. And then you have areas such as we have in the right hand side picture, where we have a bar over the loading area, so that people cannot go from the farm onto the truck, and the truck drivers cannot go from the truck onto the farm. But we must try to develop this transshipping zone. And here we see a farm, illustration of a farm. And what we have now is we now have 2 trucks. We have the farm only truck, and we have the off-site truck. We now have we have 2 sets of feeders or feed bins. We have the feed bins that are on the outer perimeter, and then we have the feed bins by the farm itself. We are fairly familiar with the concept of a red zone, as in the area outside the farm, outside the farm's control. We're fairly familiar with the concept of a green zone, an area where the pigs are safe within the farm. What we are suggesting now is we need to design an area of a grey zone, this area between off-farm and on-farm. We want to try and create an air gap between the outside world and the farm. And if we create an air gap, then African swine fever is unlikely to jump it. The yellow squares indicate a loading area. We therefore need 2 loading areas as well, because we're going to be going to transshipping pigs on and off. We're going to be transshipping food on. We're going to be effectively transshipping people. People will have to go from the off farm through a showering system to the on farm. These things all need to be SOP'd and coordinated. The problem with all of this is rules, and so what we see here is a truck driver who is spreading slurry. Fantastic, but he doesn't understand the biosecurity rules on the farm, and the disinfectant spray that's in place for foot and mouth control, as it happens. The disinfectant spray comes on after he's driven through the biosecurity place. This is a major issue that the veterinarians need to get to grips with. We've got to be teachers, we've got to be coaches, we've got to coach our clients in order to get them to realize that this is not acceptable practice. The perimeter fence has got. We must have a perimeter fence around our farms, and the perimeter fence needs to be adequate in order to stop pigs and people. Maybe electric, maybe there's even some ideas of having a fence that is repulsive to pigs to smell. But whatever, the fence has to be into the ground by 0.5 meter, and it needs to be 2 meters tall, so because pigs do jump. And we must, if you can break into your own farm by crawling under the fence, a pig can, a dog can, most certainly cats can anyway. It's difficult to control cats working in 3 dimensions. But you must stop the movement of animals onto your farm. If you have the capability, difficult in Asia, I do appreciate because of land is expensive, but here in Russia we would have a 100-meter low cropped area around the farm, so that when the maize is growing, how can I see the pigs? Pigs can come right up to the side of my farm because I can't see them moving. I maybe find the evidence of the pigs in the corn and the tracks around them. But the bottom line is that pigs are difficult to see. Here we see in a field of maize, all these pigs wait until the last possible moment before the combine was going to kill them, before they run away. Perimeter fence has got to be secure, and you've got to make sure that it works. It is not somewhere to just throw garbage. And you can see here that a pig has jumped so high that it's actually jumped into the tree. The next issue is, where do we get food for our staff? We have staff on the farm and they're going to eat. Where are we going to get food for our farm staff? Does it come from a local market? Even if you buy vegetables from the local market, is the lady selling you the vegetables also selling pork to other people? All of this needs to be considered and have some sort of biosecurity control. We've got to keep other animals off the farm, such as dogs. Here we have in the Philippines, as it happens, we've put some sows out, and the local dog is coming to try and see what it can get. These animals will transmit African swine fever on their feet between one farm and the next. Cats are very difficult. It is a major concern of mine, particularly in places like the Philippines, where we have farm cats. And as I said, when the farm is positive African swine fever, the farm cat will move to another farm in order to try and find food. In Korea, there has been concerns about birds of prey coming, feasting on dead wild boar, and then possibly moving the infection again on their feet and in their mouths, and dropping pieces of infected meat after they've eaten. But there are areas that we can control. We can control dogs coming onto the farm. More difficult with cats, very difficult with birds of prey. In wild pigs, but there's no reason for a bird of prey to be on our farm because the pigs live inside a building. We need to bird proof the building. We need to take rodent control much more seriously, and when we have rodent control, can we please use baits? I mean, baits that actually are present in the baiting box. In the right hand picture we see a nice baiting box, but it has no bait in it. I mean, how on earth would a rat be interested in dying in that area? An area that is often overlooked is flies. We must make sure that we don't transport flies from farm to farm, and particularly in our cars and our trucks. We must make sure that all the flies are shooed out of the truck before we drive on to the next farm. One of the problems with African swine fever, which is different from a lot of other diseases, is that this carcass is still infective. African swine fever can last for 18 months in bone. It can persist for a long time, and if another pig comes along and eats this bits of this carcass, it can get African swine fever itself. Together with dead animals as they rot, we have belief, and we've found African swine fever in flies. We have belief that the flies and the dead animals can then fly onto the farm and then potentially infect our pigs on the farm. So if we have dead animals, we must figure out how to remove them from the premises or bury them. We can't allow them to be available for flies to move disease. It's another reason for us having low cropping, because then if we have a dead boar close to the farm, we can actually see it and then move it. People are overplayed. One of the problems we have with people is that we think we can control them, and therefore we think that that is all that we need to do from a biosecurity point of view. That is not true. Biosecurity is about the movement of pigs, pigs feed. Pigs as food, pig meat, pig feces, and what the role that people play is that they will transport pigs' feces from farm to farm as well. In African swine fever specifically, downtime makes no difference. African swine fever does not live in ourselves, but we should keep people off the farm. We need to keep people off the farm so that they do not bring African swine fever to the farm. Ourselves and our staff, particularly with this COVID-19, one of the ways to control our own health and to protect our pigs' health is to wash our hands. But washing our hands properly, we must use a nail brush. The big issues is your nail bed and your thumbnails. And if you are using ultraviolet soap, this can be very handy because you can put the soap on. The people, your staff, can then wash their hands and try and wash the ultraviolet soap off. And you'll see particularly that the insides of the fingers and the thumbs are often poorly washed. The knuckles are poorly washed. The thumb beds are poorly washed. If you have rings on your fingers, the dirt can get underneath the rings. If you have a cut and you have a plaster, they are very difficult to clean effectively. A major problem with one type of people must be understood, and that is people who hunt. Pigs are great animals to hunt, they're great animals to eat. I enjoy hunting myself, but we must make sure that as a hunter you are not going to carry the virus onto your farm. And so you must take extra care with people who hunt. When people come to the farm, they must wash their hands, as we've talked about, but we must also change our clothing, particularly our feetwear and our outer clothing as well. We must not be a vector for the transportation of pigs' feces. That is why we need to change our boots and our clothing, and also if we use clothing, we need to make sure that it is color-coded so that it is easy to recognize whether somebody is wearing the wrong clothes. Likewise with boots. And you can see here on the picture on the left, the problem is confusion. We have multiple colors. What do they all mean? Are they on farm, off farm? Are they firing house? Are they breeding barn? Are they nursery? Who knows? You can't have this sort of confusion on a pig farm anymore. We have food as a potential source of African swine fever. An awful lot of work has been gone into trying to control food. In truth, there's very little evidence that food from the field really is a source of African swine fever. In Asia, we dry a lot of food on the road, and again, there's no evidence that really has been implicated as a source of African swine fever. The truck delivering the food can be. Now, the video on the top illustrates a feed mill. Now, if the lady sorting out the feed, if there's African swine fever on her feet and on her clothing, she could then contaminate the food. The food itself seems to be less of an issue. I would still recommend that we collect food and leave it for 40 days, though, as a precaution. There's no point taking it, even if it's a 5% of the risk, there's no point having that 5%. We need to keep the wild pigs off the farm, as we have discussed, and the question is, why would wild pigs visit? And the two main reasons is food and sex. The it is very disappointing as a veterinarian the number of times that I find food underneath the feed bin. Very difficult. There's no need. This is both an expense and a waste, and it is attracting other pigs, other birds, other rats and mice to our farms, and we just need to stop it. There are disasters that happen. The water itself is rarely a problem with for African swine fever spread. However, disasters happen, and we have typhoons which can come through and destroy a farm and then kill a lot of pigs. We must stop putting dead pig bodies into rivers. Pigs who drink infected water with African swine fever are at a very high risk of catching African swine fever themselves. The picture on the top is interesting. Top right is interesting as it shows a pig in Korea swimming. This is the open sea, swimming between islands. We can, despite saying that food is not a particular issue, we've seen that we can have pigs living in maize and cornfields and other crops. Wild pigs are very common. I appreciate some people believe that, particularly in China, that there's very few wild pigs, but there are wild pigs, and they must be taken seriously as a potential threat. And we must make sure that their feces and their urine does not come into our pig buildings through either fresh green foods or bedding. A major problem that I have come into problems with in Russia and the Ukraine is actually through electrical cabling, as we can see in the top of the PowerPoint. And what we have here is we have a farm undergoing renovation with pigs on the farm, and we're renovating a couple of cattle buildings. And we have an electrician who comes in to fix the fan or whatever. And unfortunately what had happened was that he used his own cable from another farm. That other farm had African swine fever. The cable is on the floor. The cable then picks up feces, and then we move those feces to a naive farm, and we spread African swine fever. African swine fever can be transmitted through needles and medicines, and while the number of cases between farms is very small, I do worry about it as a means of moving it around a farm, particularly if you're going to do some form of pig extraction, like a tooth extraction, where you're removing one building as part of your control program. You must have good biosecurity with needles and syringes between batches, and even within a batch as well. But again, this is another area that the veterinarian can play a big role on your farms. Now we're talking about a dead animal, and we have a suspicion that we might have African swine fever on our farms, and it is a disaster, and it is a true disaster, even having that suspicion. And I've lost many nights of sleep over the last 10 years worrying about this. One of our pleas is that when you have an animal that is dead with this animal that is dead, whether or not it is with African swine fever, what I'd encourage you to do is put the head and also the backside into a black bag, so that there is reducing the amount of viral spread around the farm. When we're talking about diagnostics, there is too much done just looking at PCR. We must use PCR, I don't deny, in the acute case. But the chronic cases, we also must look at antibodies and using ELISA. A pig will become positive by PCR within the first couple of days. But by 40 days, a lot of pigs will be negative by PCR. But unfortunately, African swine fever can have a carrier status, and these pigs, while negative by PCR, if are stressed, will shed the virus later on. Antibodies take at least 10 days, really 14 days, before they become at a level that we can be detected. But when you are looking at buying breeding stock, then what I'd be doing is I'd be looking at both antibodies and PCR. The PCR tells you whether or not they have African swine fever today. The antibody tells you whether the farmers had African swine fever yesterday. We don't need to be taking lots and lots of blood for doing particularly herd analysis. African swine fever is in all body secretions. It's present in the mouth, it's present in the saliva. All we have to do is to collect that saliva and look particularly for PCR. But we can do ELISA as well, but particularly PCR using oral fluids. We need to recover. African swine fever is a terrible disease. It can kill 70% of the pigs on the farm, probably lead to a depopulation and then a repopulation of your farm. Some people are trying to survive with African swine fever. It is problematic. However, we must move towards the recovery phase, and that will be covered in the next talk. Can we live with African swine fever? Difficult question. My answer would be no. If your farm is positive, then what happens is that, and some pigs survive. In my experience, what happens is that the sows survive, they then have babies, and then their piglets survive until about 40 kilos, at which point then they lose colostral immunity and then they get African swine fever themselves. Then you end up with your 70% mortality, which means that 30% live. So to my mind, but this is not sustainable in the long term. However, we have done some farms where we've done a partial depop, and we've allowed the sows got sick. We had the surviving sows. We then removed all the rest of the pigs, the nursery pigs and the finishing pigs, and restarted the farm again. And those farms are now about a year down the line, still producing without clinical signs, still producing finishing pigs. So perhaps there are management strategies that we can use to try and clean up our farm. But these farms are negative to African swine fever, the recovered farms. But the problem is this carrier status. We've got to be able to identify these carrier sows. There's no point keeping the farming for a year and then having a break of African swine fever because one of the sows became sick and then started to re-excrete African swine fever. In the videos here, we see one of the problems with African swine fever in the recovered phase. These pigs look perfectly well to me, but they come from a positive farm. And then we have the confusion. This again is a positive farm with finishing pigs. We have swine dysentery. So we have blood in the feces, and you can then think, oh, it's an African swine fever problem. In this particular case, it's a swine dysentery problem. But the farm could also be positive to African swine fever and dysentery. This makes the diagnostics very interesting, very complicated. I am still personally very worried about some of our native pigs. There's very little in the press talking about the pigs, the wild pigs that live throughout Asia, particularly in the islands around Asia. We have some fantastic pigs, wild pigs of our own, and we do really need to protect these animals. African swine fever is just as likely to kill these animals and then exterminate them versus the problems that we're having with our domestic pigs. So with that, I wish to thank you very much for listening to us today, and I look forward to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John Carr. You to give us the most important biosecurity method and also the knowledge of the African swine fever in the field practice. For more information on the handout, you can copy the link in the announcement and then put it in the Google Drive or in the Web Explorer, and then you will get to the share folder which contain the handout of each language. Anyway, we will send you the link to your email which you gave to us to download again. But for now, you can do both. You can wait and then get the email, or you can copy the link that we send it to you, put it in the browser, and then you will get the handout. Okay, we will be able to put Chinese subtitle to this, but it will be a little bit delayed, but we'll see. Anyway, our next speaker is Ivory Chang. He is the web service manager from Siwa, China. He has finished his PhD already, and also he has an experience, the real experience with many diseases in China, and especially African swine fever. She was there. He was there, and he was the one who controlled it. And today he will share his presentation about the topic is the light in the end of tunnel. Please welcome Ivory. Ivory, you have control.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nan Fangzheng, a web working for Siwa China. It's my great honor to share the situations and experiences regarding African swine fever in China. The title of my talk today is Lights at the End of the Tunnel. Here I would like to divide my talk into 5 parts: the situations regarding SF in China, the potential risks faced in reality, the lessons learned about the repopulation, keep thinking and improving of your biosecurity. Here I would like to share some interesting cases how Chinese people try to improve their biosecurity systems. And the final summary. After stepping into the new millennium, the great demand for pork accelerates the extensive expansion of intensive pig farming in China, but also accompanies with several devastating diseases. For example, the post-winning multi-system wasting syndrome in 2002. We all know that it is PCV2 associated. Fortunately, high-quality vaccines can be of great help against PCV2 and PCV2 associated diseases. 4 years later, the epidemic outbreak of heteropathogenic parasites is another disaster, causing great losses of pigs all around China. Inactivated live-attenuated vaccines or inactivated or live-attenuated vaccines can be effective in some degrees, and prevalent strain is not as violent as it was in 2006. That is why biosecurity is not brought to the forefront at that moment. Another 4 years later, the devastating pandemic of porcine epidemic diarrhea swept across most all the mainland. It is a variant strain of PDV, but also can be well controlled with batch management and partial protective vaccines. You can see that 4 years of cycle for the merging of pig diseases in China. Another double 4 years later, there comes the nightmare of pig industry in China, African swine fever. It only takes several months to spread over the mainland. Farmers tried all the measures used against other diseases. Nothing works well, but biosecurity. So far, the breeding stock in China dropped heavily after certification, and more than 40% of the reproducible sows are 3-week crossbreeds, which should be sent to the slaughterhouse rather than the gestation farm places. At the same time, the pig industry is welcoming a super pork cycle in China, with a profits of more than €300 per pig from closed farm production, increasing by more than 700% when compared with the profits in the same period last year. What's more, vigorous support of the Chinese government and experiences and competence of asset prevention and control The pig industry in China is embracing space ages and epic growth. COVID-19 could be the keywords in 2020 all around the world. But in China, the keywords in pig industry in 2020 should be repopulation rather than SF. Not only because of the recovery time, but also the beginning of the exponential growth. However, on the other hand, we have to face reality how difficult repopulation is. Look at the picture on the left. It is a very common way to bury dead pigs on farm around your farm. But how many farms can guarantee these dead pigs are thoroughly disinfected? It is not just about covering. Actually, at least 10 kilograms of quicklime are required for effective extraction of 100 kilogram dead pig. This is a very interesting case happens on a farm in China. The pig struggled to expose itself to the ground after land filling, but nobody cares. Besides the pigs, these kinds of rubbishes on farm should also be removed and covered with quicklime at once. At the beginning of repopulation, farms should be closed. But it is not just the gates, but also the scalper and rain-washed hole under the perimeter fence. Moreover, rodents and mechanical vector control program should be carried out at the same time. We should not only clean the sundries and weeds, but also checking the base frequently. Because of the deadline assigned with a variety of reasons, almost all farms are trying their best to accelerate the pace of repopulation. However, we still need to rethink whether we can really handle it. Normally, mistakes and cheating comes one by one, if all in a rush. Thoroughly cleaning is the key to successful depopulation. But how many farms would like to spend more than 70% of the time doing the cleaning work? Taking the flame disinfection as example, does it work? Of course. But with limited effective action area, it will take quite a long time for the whole face channel. Please keep in mind that thorough cleaning is not only essential for further effective inspection, but also the better way to save your time. Look at the video on the right. This is a gestation room in the modern farm. A lot of gestation bombs, a lot of work to clean. Cleaning is all about patience, carefulness, and earnest to all the high-intensive work. You are hard enough to wipe up all the faces on every blaster, especially the ones at the bottom which could not be easily washed. You are hard enough to dismantle the components in the firing house. You are hard enough to wash with high-pressure warm water in different angles to ensure that all the surfaces are thoroughly washed. You work hard enough to scrub all the dead corners with steel wool. There's an old saying goes, details determine success or failure. Lime wash is widely used for both disinfection and inspection. This is what we expected, but this is often what we have done far. In China, there's a very interesting question regarding repopulation. What is the golden standard of final inspection? qPCR testing of environmental samples or sentinel pigs? Sentinels are textbook measures for viral traces. Regarding SF, at least 1 month is required, and blood samples should be taken for qPCR and ELISA detection at last. However, In order to speed up production, many farms prefer to skip sentinels and introduce skills directly on farm after qPCR confirmation. Nucleic acid detection could not be able to fully reflect the presence of infectious viral particles. On the contrary, no nucleic acid, no viruses. 25-kilo sentinel pigs are searching for prey like police dogs, and they're always effective. Although qPCR testing of environmental samples are more sensitive, there are still risks whether the samples are taken at the right places. Some farms did a great job in preliminary work, but still fall short because of the wrong pigs introduced. African swine fever is very clever. It does not kill all the pigs in a group, and it can't even be detected by qPCR in the blood of recovered pigs. However, these pigs can restart to shed under certain circumstances. For example, being sunburned together with long-distance transportation. Fortunately, ASAV-specific antibodies can be detected for the whole life of pig. Therefore, rather than random sample collection or limited sample collection, qPCR and ELISA should both be carried out for every pig before introduction. Moreover, in order to rule out the potential risk of incubation period, double negative pigs introduced should also be isolated and supervised for at least 21 days on farm. In China, especially after the correction of SF, getting access to pigs seems more grander than any pilgrimages. Although it is a common thing that people can't be infected, most farms still require strict isolation, and people have to take even 4 showers before entering to the pig pens. Are people the potential risks? Yes, they are extremely dangerous if they cheat or make mistakes. I always believe that the staffs who have never experienced SF could not have deep understanding of it. Actually, for most of staffs working on farm, this is what's being taught, but this is what's being grasped. Together with the conflicts of interest, people start to cheat and make mistakes. This is what I have seen on Nice Farm. The staff destroyed the perimeter fence for the purpose of sewage disposal. I asked him why did he do that. He complained that it would take several hours to detour around the farm to the other side of the perimeter fence. Similarly, many farms broke up SA because of returned piglets from the external loading areas. This is my rural farm market. You can see there are still a lot of pork for sale, and the price is approximately 60 RMB per kilo. How fortunate I am to still also have pork to eat at this tough moment. Wearing protective facial mask is a fashion for better protection of COVID-19. Now in China, everybody must wear the mask when going outside. But what can you see in this video? Yes, here we can see the old lady cheating, with mask covering his mouth, but not nose. In fact, not everybody does not cheat, and it's possible that the one who cheated could be the black sheep of the outbreak of SF. Here I would like to share an interesting picture taken in Ep1 Yokado. Tissue paper for elevator buttons, trash for tissue paper collection, plastic confirm for better disinfection, and public boards for inspection recording. All these details help customers to realize the potential risk of cross-contamination and provides a convenient way to operate. I believe it was learning for our farms. Guidance and accommodation rather than strict rules and punishments may work more effectively. Moreover, it also straight to the key points of asset prevention: no contact, no contamination. I prefer to use aseptic concept for better understanding and medical gloves for better practicing, especially with fluorescence powders for better inspection. This is a video download from YouTube, and it is just a video teaching people how to wear medical gloves. It will take several minutes, so let's see what he will told us. You can see just he opened the plastic. And now he opened the paper, and you can see just open the paper carefully, and that uses hand to touch the surface of the medical gloves. And then please look carefully. How can he just wear this medical gloves? And you can see just they use his left hand to touch the internal parts of the medical gloves, not the surface, and use his right hand to get into the gloves. And you can see this detail. He just try not to avoid the contact with the surface of the gloves, and use the one who have already wear with the glove to touch the surface. You can see the surface, not the internal parts of the glove, another glove. The surface of glove, you can see like this. And so you use this method just to wear another glove. I think it's enough, and we can just summary that the guy is trying his best to avoid is the direct contact of his hand to the surface of the medical glove. Reality tells us no matter how successful the repopulation is, inadequate biosecurity system still can ruin your farm one night back before liberation. Therefore, improving your biosecurity system is another essential part of repopulation. In terms of biosecurity, there's no best but better. Here I would like to share some interesting cases, how Chinese people keep improving their biosecurity system. These pictures are taken outside of the farm. You can see on this wall, it was written, forbidden districts for people selling medicines and feed. Otherwise, you will be killed. You can see how difficult for salesmen to work in animal health companies in China. We would like to use the word kill, which actually means harsh punishment. This is our colleague, Daniel. He was curious and impressed by the routine work of qPCR detection during our customer visits. Does it really work? Difficult to say. If you take shower and change your clothes before entering, it is indeed meaningless. However, in terms of my own experience, the psychological effects pushed me to shower carefully and change new clothes before testing. All of our foods were disinfected or cooked. The unfound materials are dispensed again and again, just like all these bottles of medicines. These bottles of medicines are not expired. What you see is just the outcome of the immersion distraction and high frequency of the fumigation. Is that right? I may say no, but it reflects the cautious attitude to everything, unfound or found. It is very embarrassing that most of the farms could not find a reason for SF outbreak in China. Therefore, fees was chosen to be the scapegoats, even though there is no direct evidence of transmission through feeds or even qPCR negative. Why? Because the feed and grapes come from the epidemic area in the northeast of China, where the first case of SF happens. Anyway, patented feeds, which was heated for 1 to 3 minutes at 85 degrees, is widely used in China. And most farms prefer to use bulk feed instead of packaged feed, as to reduce the risk of package delivery. Trucks into the farm are one of the major risks for SF outbreak. Therefore, the procedures of truck cleaning and inspection keeps improving all the time. From showering and fumigation of the cabin to high pressure wash and disinfection. Now heat drying chambers widely used in China. However, the major risks still exist if trucks still into the farm. That's why just we encourage the green zone concept, because it is very, very difficult to clean and inspecting a farm thoroughly. For better pig transshipping, it is much better to have a loading area 1 kilometer away from a farm, and only your own transshipping truck can come to your farm loading area. This is an interesting video taken from SF3 farm. The farmers designed the delivery system for pig transshipping. It runs very slow, but it works. Not only to reduce the risks, but also save the time and money to clean the trucks outside. For mechanical vector control, air filtration system may be too advanced. The airborne diseases like PARS, asthma, plasma pneumonias, can be well prevented. By contrast, dense wall netting is much more cost-effective and widely used in China. Here, I would like to share the video taken on the farm with indigenous breeds. These terraced pig houses are covered with bridal veil. The manager told me that it was inspired by the mosquito nets widely used in rural China. The concept of grid management and tooth extraction is very popular in China now. In order to cut the losses when SF3 occur, many farms prefer to replace trough into individual drinkers in the gestation house. You can question whether tooth extraction is reasonable. Before answering this question, let's think about the measures being taken when SF outbreak at country level or regional level. Why not taking the whole production of surveillance though as a bad tooth which need to be extracted? Because of the nature of no contact, no contamination of SIV, it is feasible to extract the infected pigs and maintain the uninfected pigs with well-trained professionals and sentinel testing measures. Now in China, stable is a popular word describing the farm saved after SF incursion. The earlier the suspect is deconfirmed, the more easily tooth extraction can be carried out and a greater chance of success. This is a special seminar designed to take inguinal lymph node samples from dead pigs with minor trauma. Experimental data indicates It is more sensitive to use ingrained lymph samples than swabs for early detection with qPCR. Besides the clinical infected pigs, finding all the infected pigs during the latent and subclinical period are of great importance to effective QC extraction. Therefore, 1 month period of silence is very essential in the process of tooth extraction. Some farms even stop cleaning up the places where suspected people stayed. It means that people knows more about the virus now. No contact with vectors, no risk of contamination. However, many farms running continuous production system fails in the process of tooth extraction because of the frequency movements of people, pigs, and materials before first notice. This is why batch production systems become more and more popular in China. It not only reduces the risk of air-cell contact points, such as semen introduction and pig sealing, but also prevent the cross-contamination of materials between different batches with strict color management. CETA is proud to have a tool for better management called ultrasound. Together with our veterinary service, we devote ourselves to help more and more customers to make better biosecurity in the fight against SF. African swine fever is an unprecedented disaster for pig industry in China, and I think also Asia. It changed the ways of disease prevention and control. Medicines and vaccines are now the passkeys to all pig diseases. In terms of African swine fever, recovered pigs and immature vaccines are landmines which can explode at any moment. African swine fever promotes us to rethink of the measures for disease prevention and control, promotes us to redesign the pig flow model, to review the farm for better improvements of both internal and external biosecurity. And it also promotes us to embrace the best ages for reviving. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ivory, for your sharing. Now we know a lot of experience from China and also know some trick that we have to redesign the farm, rethinking, and also we know that someone will be killed if they enter the farm without any allow. Okay, now it's our Q&A session. We have a lot, many questions, and now all the speaker is with us. We will start with maybe the situation. We have the question from the floor. This question is about do you see any difference between the consumer, the meat, any difference between Europe and Asia? I think this question will go to Ruth. Now everyone will be live. We open all the camera. Okay, Ruth, we have the question for you. Do you see any difference between Europe and Asia for the meat consumption or behavior during the COVID-19? ไม่ปิดโอ้พี่ไม่ได้ยินเลย Ruth, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. So the difference between the European people and the Asian in the meat consumption and also the consume of the meat during COVID-19. Do they need?
Yeah, what I said, I don't know whether you can hear me, but we don't see a tremendous impact on consumption of pork in home consumption. Of course, what is very much affected is the retail, is the restaurants and the hotels that are closed. So eating from home is very much affected, but I think it has a bigger effect on the consumption of chicken and maybe beef as on pork. So pork is pretty resilient in terms of consumption, of home consumption. So what we see so far is that the consumption is less affected than other ones. That's what we see so far. But because what is very much affected is trade, which and of course with China being a big importer. So there is an effect on trade, but in terms of consumption, we see relatively little impact so far.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we have around 15 minutes. We have many questions already. Most of the question will be from the ASF. I think most popular question they have also a lot of like is maybe the water treatment. How about the chlorine? Can chlorine kill the ASF, and how's about the concentrate? This question will be, maybe you can give the comment first, John. This question will go to you. The chlorine and ASF and water.
Avery, would you know the answer better?
Okay.
Avery, we don't have the speaker on you.
Maybe Avery, you can unmute your mic. No, it's still mute. Okay. Okay, we can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Just for the method for water extraction, as in China, most people like not only the chlorine, but also just the acid fighting agents and oxidizing agents. But for the chlorine, that the customer said in the question, I would like to say that in China, that some farms have done some experiments. For example, if just use that barrels to pack together just the concentration, maybe they have tried just 50 ppm, 40 ppm, and 20 ppm still works. But also not only about the concentration, but also about the period. Yeah, so just we have some good experiments that also need more than 1 hour just for the testing with the concentration with 20 ppm. That works. Yeah.
Okay. Another question is, John, you have mentioned about the farm which infected with ASF already, and they still keep raising the pig. Do you know about how's about the performance? Do they have still keep the good performance, or it's worse, or it's so?
Well, one of the things that I was amazed at is that after the farm broke with African swine fever, and we're in a country where we did not have to kill everything, it was reported to the government, so the government knew what we were doing. Anyway, we did a couple of tooth extractions, as in we killed out some of the finishing rooms, but in truth we were too late. As Avery has pointed out as well, if you do effective tooth extraction, you need to be very rapid, and the problem that I have in this particular country is diagnostics is limited. So we had, we took out some of the finishing units, and we had some sow deaths. But the sows, we have only 300 sows. So the sows numbers went down to about 220. So we lost 80 sows, which was very significant. We lost a number of finishing pigs. But then things seemed to settle. We then did some cleanup and some lime, very much following the same thing that Avery had talked about, using lime. And what was amazing was that the sows stopped dying. We proved that the sows were actually positive, but were not ill. One of the problems with African swine fever, it does not kill 100%. It kills 70%. On this farm, it probably killed about 30%. So you have the rest of the pigs are positive, then they go PCR negative on a simple examination, and antibody positive. But there's always a risk that they become carriers. So we farmed for another year, and those videos that I showed you comes from the farm. And what was amazing was that we could get the sows pregnant. We had a 85% plus farrowing rate. So reproduction was unaffected. We produced babies. We were weaning 11 and a half pigs. These are good quality sows. One of the problems that we have in this country is if I did depopulate, where was I going to buy pigs that were negative from anyway? And Mum and Dad doesn't have any more money, so to depopulate basically meant that they were going to go bankrupt. Now, these were the sort of things that led to us having a go at trying to protect and farm the farm. So we farmed the farm. Mum got pregnant. Mum had babies. Mum weaned good, strong pigs at 28 days. The pigs did really well up to about 12 weeks of age. And then they died. And we lost sometimes 30%, sometimes 50%. Now, in this particular country, the price of pork more than doubled, and so in truth, we were now actually making money, because even though we lost half the pigs, we were actually making more money than we were before the African swine fever started. But it's still very, very depressing when your pigs get to 60, 70 kilos, and within 4 days, they're dead. And some of the pictures that you saw with the gallbladders and things come from this farm as well. So what we then sat down around the table and we decided that we had a little bit of money left. We'd have one major go, because I had noticed that the sow mortality had stopped. So we did what's called a partial depop, which is like a modified tooth extraction. And a friend had some buildings that were now empty because his pigs had all died. And we put all of the finishing pigs, all of the nursery pigs, and all of the piglets into this friend's farm. So we effectively emptied Mum and Dad's farm, and all we had left was the sows and the boars. And then we started again. So the sows farrowed on a farm where there was no finishing pigs. And we've now been doing this for over a year, and the finishing pigs are not getting sick. We're getting to 40 kilos, they're not getting ill. And it would appear as if we have eliminated African swine fever. We have tested for African swine fever, and it would appear to be negative. The textbooks and some of the science journals are now talking that maybe the carrier status is not as bad as we first thought. But in this particular case, I have very limited ability to do diagnostics. I can only tell you what we're actually doing. But it is a potential model that perhaps this problem is so extensive in Asia that one of our big problems is where do we get negative stock from, and how do we survive from A to B?
Okay, thank you very much. We have a lot of questions from in the topic of repopulation. Maybe first about the successful rate. Maybe this question will be go to Ivory. Can you tell us the successful rate of the repopulation from the farm which have ASF outbreak?
This question is very is very important to everybody. But to tell the truth, I have to say just the successful rates of the repopulation in China is very low. Some farms just they just become infected again and again, and not only about the biosecurity. I just mentioned in my presentation, but also a lot of reasons. Just that the wrong pigs introduced, and some people even just rely on more on just maybe just immature vaccines, maybe something like that. But still some farms just they did a good job, and also some partial depopulation. For example, just this is SF infected farm, and they do tooth extraction, and they do partial depopulation, and then that works. And I can see just maybe some big farm, just maybe some big groups, just they do much better work because of the efforts they made. The more professionals, more experts, just can work on it, and more sensitive measures. Yeah.
Okay, and yes, John. Yes, you can give a comment.
Yeah, my experience in the Ukraine and Russia, where we are slightly different, because we have space between the farms. My experience with Ukraine and Russia is with the village farms. The depopulation and repopulation can be hit and miss. It can be a disaster. I've got guys who've done it 3 or 4 times and they keep breaking. But the reason is they break because they don't follow any biosecurity. They're buying pigs from a market. They're buying pigs from this guy who had a pig in the market. The commercial farms, and I would argue not against Avery, but the commercial farms are being very successful at repopulation. When they put the perimeter fence in place, they put the movement of pigs and people in place, and they buy pigs from a negative source. But you've got to be sensible. There's no point in trying to buy pigs from 50 different negative sources and then hope that all of them are negative on the day that the pigs arrive. And if you're going to fill the farm, you can't fill the farm over a year. 52 different deliveries, one of them could go wrong. But if farmers are serious professional pig farmers with an African swine fever outbreak followed by depopulation, followed by most of what Avery has talked about. Because it's up to a point, Avery and I can talk a lot about biosecurity, but we also accept that people live in a real world and they can do only what they can do. But there are some things they have to do. They have to stop having pork products on the farm. They've got to stop bringing pigs onto the farm. They've got to have a perimeter fence. And this transshipping zone that we're encouraging people to think about really can make an enormous difference. You just have this air gap between the outside world and the on-side world. But the problem with a guy with a village pig with 6 pigs, can't have an air gap around his house. It's just not going to work.
Okay, so maybe it will lead to another question, which is, from your experience, between the successful farm and the fail, which is the farm which infect the SF, what is the major fail that you found, or the one that they forgot to do it, or the one that they don't implement? Maybe we can ask from John first. What is the most fail that they have from your experience?
They don't have a fence.
Fence?
I mean, they don't have. Every farm I've gone to, which is broken with African swine fever, don't have adequate perimeter fencing.
And what do you think, Ivory?
It absolutely terrifies me that if something like the United States get African swine fever, it'll be absolute chaos because the Americans don't believe in fencing. I mean, they're a big open country. Europeans have a better understanding of fence. An Englishman's house is his castle. and it's one of the reasons why the Europeans, certainly Western Europeans, will have a better chance of stopping this horrible disease. But I would argue, and I'll see what Avery says, but I would argue that a lot of every farm we've been to where the farm broke with African swine fever did not have adequate fencing. It was an illusion.
So, and actually this one is not only for the ASF, right? It can be for all the, yeah.
I mean, biosecurity is not just African swine fever. I mean, the advantage of what we're trying to do is that farmers need to look at African swine fever not as an advantage, but it is a reason why we can enhance our biosecurity and then improve the general health of the farm anyway.
Any comment, Ari?
Yeah, I agree with John because because I go with John. I work with John to work around a lot of fences in many farms in China, and we have seen that is true. And I think it's more than it is just like an attitude. If they did not do well just in the fence, and how can they deal with other things on farm and to improve the biosecurity, or even just to prevent deaths of outdoor farm? So I also agree with John. Just the first step, and it is not only the measures, your fences, in the integrity of your fences, but also your attitude when we deal with the biosecurity system. Yeah.
Yeah, I could add one more thing. One of the problems with biosecurity is people worry about people. I mean, what I mean is they build 1 shower, 2 showers, 3 showers, 4. They think the more showers, the more secure. And then they don't have a gate. They don't have a lock. They don't have a door. And then Avery and I have been to showers, and people stop using soap because they're bored they're on their 5th shower. They're just getting in the water because it's another shower. I mean, people need to stop worrying about people per se. I mean, I don't disagree with the shower, but what is the point of the shower? The shower is to take your clothes off. The shower is to stop the movement of pig feces from off farm to on farm. The shower is not to sterilize the member of staff. I mean, that's not, I mean, you know, we put a shower because most people will actually undress. I've seen one person who didn't, but most people will undress to go and have a shower. They'll take their shoes off, they'll take their clothes off. But there's no point if they then walk back to where their clothes was, have it dry themselves, and then put on farm clothes that are being sitting on next to the clothes they just took off. Or even put their own clothes back on. I've even seen people do that. And then think, well, I've had a shower. As Avery says quite rightly, biosecurity is in here. Sometimes it's not a physical thing, it's a mental attitude.
So maybe we can, the fence and the attitude will be very important. The fence, maybe you have to control the door gate, right? I mean, you have door gate and then you have fence around your farm, and also the attitude. So this is really important. Yes.
The fence is attitude, because what the fence does is it creates on farm, off farm. It creates an attitude that I am going to be secure. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I try and encourage people to be PRRS negative. It's not that PRRS necessarily affects my production that badly, but because I'm PRRS negative, people's attitude to biosecurity is higher, because I don't want PRRS to enter my farm. And if PRRS is on the farm, people go, oh, well, I've already got PRRS. So, you know, the more pathogen specifically free you are, you know, the more people's attitude is much enhanced. Exactly what Avery's saying. Biosecurity is in your head as much as it is in the physical pieces. But mankind likes physical pieces. They like a fence. They like a shower. They like rules. But you know, batching from a PED point of view, because PED is a bloody terrible problem in China as well, in Asia. I mean, PED with 3-week batching, we could break PED. That'd be an enormous step forward in pig production.
All right. We still have very good discussion and also more and more question coming, but we don't have time left. So I think we're going to find a way to send the answer to you later. Anyway, we will send the link to. Yes,
I'm
yes.
more than happy to have questions. You know, we could work away. Avery and I could work our way through some questions.
Yeah. Okay, and we will send you the link of the handout. You can choose which language of handout do you want, and also we will send the survey form to you, and you also select which language do you want to, and then please give us the feedback, and then we can improve our webinar for next time. And our next episode for the seminar will be about the farm in the future. We will is maybe on the July, but we will tell you exactly the date and the topic again. So today, thank you very much for your attention, and we will have a record, and then we will send through our subsidiary. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.